Hello, my name is Todd Akers. I'm with Ladonia, Texas News and Information. And today we have the honor of sitting here with our Chief of Police, Chief Howard Day. Thank you so much for coming, and thank you for your service.
Thanks for having me.
What I would like to do is get your story. And let's start at the beginning when you actually interviewed for the job. And tell us about your vision for the Ladonia Police Department.
It's a tall order, Todd. Sure. I was the program director of criminal justice for Paris Junior College. I'd been there a year and a half or so, maybe almost 2 years. And I was going to hold a law enforcement forum on campus and invite all the local law enforcement leaders from our service area to come to the college and learn about our programs. And the city of Ladonia was in our service area. So this was the spring of 2019, and I reached out to the city and found out that in fact 5 years earlier the department had closed due to budget issues. So I didn't think too much of it. The city secretary, Debbie, at the time, told me that Supreme Beef had gone out of business, and they no longer had the money to support a law enforcement agency. So thanked her for her time, and I went on with my invite list. And then a short time after the forum was over, something made me come back to Ladonia and learn a little bit more. And I read about Supreme Beef and all of that, and then I stumbled on the Lake Ralph Hall project coming to Ladonia. Little background, I was badge number 1 for the city of Anna back in 2005. So I had some experience in growth and building a department from the ground up, and the importance of getting ahead of the curve when it comes to cities expanding. So I thought, what a great real-world project for my college students. I came down in May, and I did my 3-minute citizen comment time, and I introduced myself to the council. And I said, hey, look, I've got some eager students. I'd like to partner them with you next semester and help build you a 5-year strategic plan for the growth of not only the city, but in particular the police department that you're going to need. And I remember you were on the council at the time, and thought it was a great idea, and so I put it in my back of my head, that's what we were going to do. And then school let out for the semester, and I brought my wife down here one Saturday because we love the little historic downtowns, and we happened to run into Mayor Cooper at Pig and Whistle. And I'd done some research, and I looked at the budget, and I saw the city did not have the budget necessary to run a police department. The only way that it was going to become feasible anytime in the near future was if we did it as an all-reserve, non-paid volunteer department. And I talked with state officials, and there were a dozen or more of these type agencies around the state, and said, yes, we could do this. So I mentioned that to Mayor Cooper, who then asked me to put together some information and come back and present it at the next council. So in talking back and forth with Mayor and Debbie, the city secretary, I put together a proposal that I would come in and help them reactivate the police department, get us recommissioned by the state, and run it completely as an all-reserve volunteer department. So in June, that's exactly what we did. We gave that presentation to the council. Here are the things that I can bring. Here's the things that I need the city to provide. And to the city's credit, they stepped right up and did it. You guys did it right away. I was sworn in as the chief. There was a resolution passed to activate the police department, and then the only money that was available was an old account that had $5,000 in it. And I was going to be expected to build and run a police department on $5,000. So that's what we did. June I was sworn in. We started the process, and I spent most of the summer here, 62 days, working with all the state agencies, the local district attorney's office, the sheriff's office, and other vendors. And we received our accreditation in August of 2019, and we've been running ever since.
Awesome. Could you tell us a little bit about some of the people we've brought on board since?
Sure. The first 6 months it was just me. Quite honestly, I walked into a mess. The 3 offices that had belonged to the police department had been padlocked for those 5 years. So everything was thrown in trash bags and boxes, and every box and every bag I opened, a brown recluse spider ran out of. So there was a lot of administrative behind the scenes things that needed to be done, policies that needed to be written, etc. And then in December I brought on the first reserve officer. And then the following year we brought on a couple more. And these are all people that I've met in the law enforcement community that I've either worked with or they've worked for me in some capacity. We know each other in the law enforcement community. And they said, "Hey Chief, what are you doing out in Ladonia?" I said, "Well, I'm building a brand new police department." "Really? Ground up?" I said, "Yeah." "Well, you got a spot for me? I want in. This sounds cool." So in each one that we brought on brought a unique set of skills and qualifications and experience, and I'm so blessed to have this team supporting me. I've got 2 men that have over 30 years in law enforcement. One of them was one of the first field inspectors for the Texas Commission on Law Enforcement. They go around and inspect police departments all around the state. John Hunt was one of the first men to do that. He's been a police chief before, so he's a great asset to have. Our investigator, Brad Blankenship, 33 years, almost 34 now in law enforcement. Retired sergeant out of the Sherman Police Department's Criminal Investigation Division, and then 8 years running the local police academy. He was the police academy director for 8 years. So I worked for him for a little while as the night academy director or coordinator, and then at one point when I was the interim chief in Tom Bean, he was my investigator there. So these are the caliber of men and women that we brought together. We started out with a civilian position. Twyla Blassingame was brought on board very early, and she has a unique background. She was actually one of my students for a while at Paris Junior College. Went on to get her work on her bachelor's degree at A&M, and she was our community outreach liaison. Law enforcement is not just writing tickets and responding to 911 calls. Modern law enforcement looks across the board at community needs, and we try and address them with local, county, state, federal resources. Many of the times we respond to a call, it might be a stolen bike or it might be a juvenile delinquency thing or something, but we see a family in need, and so we should be able to bring outside resources to bear. So I brought Twyla on very early as our community outreach liaison, and she's ultimately responsible for feeding famine coming to town. If you remember that whole process, it started out with a project through Texas A&M. They wanted to do sustainable gardens so that people had a continuous food source that they were responsible for. You raise your own vegetables, fruits and vegetables, you always have something to eat. And that was originally going to be a program that we did with the ISD, and have the ag department have a student or school garden, and then the students would go home and pass on the lessons learned to their own families, and around town we'd have a sustainable garden program. But in the interim, there were still people that were hungry. There were people in need in our community that were depending on church organizations like Oak Ridge to come in and bring them boxes of food. So the police department stepped up with our community outreach liaison, and we partnered with Feeding Famine, and now every month, the first Tuesday of every month, they're here handing out food, and I know a lot of families have benefited from that. So those are the types of programs, and those are the types of people that we've brought together over the last 3 years.
That's awesome stuff. So, can you tell us a little bit about the difference between a volunteer police department and a paid?
Sure. Yeah, there's some significant differences, and I know that that's led to some misunderstandings with some people in the community. An all reserve department is exactly that. These are all fully commissioned police officers. If you have an all volunteer fire department, they do go through some training, but there's not a requirement that they've all been to the basic firefighter course or an EMT course or something like that. With law enforcement, because of the scope of our duties, every volunteer must be a fully commissioned police officer. So every member of our agency that is sworn has been through the entire full police academy. They've been through a field training program, and now they're working as a police officer. Although they're not paid, they still have to keep up their continuing education hours and all of that. So when we set this up, there was an agreement, a scope of work, if you will, that was put together between myself and the city to say, here's the process, here's what we can bring, and here's what we need the city to bring. And I touched on some of that earlier. But one of the key components is we are not full-time. We are not on call. Although as the police chief, I have asked the sheriff's office to call me for major cases. Everybody's familiar with the J.C. Campbell murder. I got that call just shortly after it happened, and within an hour I left my paid job and I was here on scene along with my patrol sergeant, Sergeant Green. He came in as well. So we're on call for the major stuff, mostly for notification. Every citizen in the city of Ladonia has always called 911 and got the Fannin County Sheriff's Office. When we came on board, none of that changed. They're still your primary 911 responder for law enforcement, really for anything. They also dispatch our volunteer fire department. The agreement was that I would be notified of any major incidents in town because I need that awareness. I need to know what's going on within our city limits. Doesn't mean I can leave my paid job and drive out here to help with, I don't know, a minor car crash or a stolen bicycle or something like that. It's still Fannin County Sheriff's Office responsibility to respond to those law enforcement calls. If one of our officers is on duty, then by all means, they call us on the radio, we go and we deal with it, we take the call, we make the arrest, we write the report, whatever's necessary. But that's originally that's how it still is set up, is when you call 911, you get the Fannin County Sheriff's Office. And then if a Ladonia volunteer is on duty, then we're happy to respond. Otherwise, the expectation is that a Fannin County deputy comes out. Few exceptions. Occasionally dispatch will call me and there's what we say an over with call, something that's already happened. It might be hours old. They just found, I don't know, their bicycle stolen, whatever. Do we need to take one of the deputies and have him drive from telephone all the way down here to take that report? Or can I call the victim and get their information over the phone or make arrangements for them to come into the police department the next time we're in town, right? But really important to understand that we are volunteers. I ask, there's no mandate through the state. You can't mandate that volunteers do X number of hours. Texas Commission on Law Enforcement has no mandate, 0 hours required for reserves. But we ask that they put in 16 hours. And for the most part, we get that. Sometimes it goes way over, and sometimes things happen. Their work schedule changes, or their car breaks down, whatever. Life happens. But we have to remember that these are non-paid volunteers that for the last 3 years, with a $5,000 a year budget, the city hasn't paid for a single gallon of gasoline in either of the police marked units. The police officers use their own money to buy that gasoline. They've paid for repairs. We had to replace the intake manifold on that older Crown Vic, and the officers paid for that out of their own pocket. $5,000 a year doesn't go very far. I'm very proud to say that it looks like this will be the 3rd year in a row. We haven't even spent all of that $5,000. There's always been money left over. The only thing that the money that the city pays for right now is we buy one set of uniforms for the officers because we expect them to be in uniform. We buy them their badge, and pretty much the rest of the money goes to required software contracts. You know, we have to have the record management system, and we have to have a cell phone. So we have AT&T, which is the only signal. If you're in Ladonia, that's about the only one you get good signal on. But it gives us Wi-Fi in the car, and it gives us a cell phone to talk to the sheriff's office with. So those kind of subscription things are really what the money goes to. Everything else, the officers, myself, have paid for out of our own pocket. And that's the way it's been for the last 3 years. Last year, we were able to bring in a couple of big grants. With the help of Mayor Cooper, we went up and got the TCOG board to vote in our favor, and we won a criminal justice grant, which led to a brand new police vehicle, $62,000 grant. Police cars are not cheap. And we also got a mandated software upgrade. The reporting system that we send to the FBI every year on the number of calls within our jurisdiction used to be under a program called UCR, or Uniform Crime Report. As of next year, all law enforcement agencies have to go to a new program called NIBRS, the National Incident-Based Reporting System. And there's a mandate, if you want to get state or federal grants, you have to be NIBRS compliant. So we were ahead of the power curve on that. We were able to get a $7,500 grant for that last year as well. And so we're already NIBRS compliant almost a year before we were required to. So that was $69,000 in grant money, and that came into the city through the police department last year, along with, I forget how many hours, 1,400 hours of free labor. Everybody that is involved with the Ladonia Police Department truly has a servant heart. They choose to come to Ladonia and be a part of this project, this department, this community. They see something, and maybe I'm guilty of painting them this picture of what it's going to look like in 5 or 10 years down the road, what I see in my head. But they, to their credit, have bought into it. They give of their own time, they give of their own money, they bring in their own resources. And I'm very proud of what we've accomplished over the last 3 years.
Awesome. So there's been a lot of talk about repairing the old siren warning system.
Yes, yeah.
And I know from my own experience trying to look at grants and things for that sort of thing, and they're just really not there. And it's largely because these systems are legacy.
Yes, outdated.
They're outdated.
According to FEMA. According to FEMA, it's outdated software, it's outdated technology.
I can recall even when that system actually worked, when we first moved here, if you were inside, you had the windows closed, you couldn't even hear it.
Right.
And it's just 2 blocks away.
Yeah.
To get through these canopies of trees would take an enormously big system.
Yeah, one of the things that I did, and I have a background in emergency management. I learned about FEMA and emergency management when I was a deputy out in Orlando, because we had the hurricanes that would come in. And so that was part of our training, was understanding how emergency management and community evacuations took place. And Florida's cracked the code because they have to evacuate entire counties, entire regions of Florida sometimes when those storms roll in. And then when I came back and we were establishing Anna, it was the same thing. We had no early warning system. We had a tornado siren on the fire department building, and that was about it. And the fire chief, or then later the fire marshal, could activate that program in Anna. So I ensured that all of our law enforcement officers went through basic FEMA courses so they could speak the language, understand the concept of how emergency management worked, and it made them better first responders. when I came to Ladonia, one of the other civilian positions that I filled was as an emergency management coordinator. Per our charter as a city, our mayor is the emergency manager recognized by the emergency Office of Emergency Management in Bonham. Right? The County Office of Emergency Management recognizes the mayor of the city as the city's emergency manager. He or she can delegate that, and for the last few years that's what Mayor Cooper had decided to do, to turn that over to those of us that were trained, that were certified in emergency management. Not that she lost responsibility, but the day-to-day stuff fell on us. So I hired a young man by the name of Jason. He had been in firefighting 20 years, had a background in emergency management, a lot of certificates, and he began working with Fannin County Office of Emergency Management with the long-term strategic view of us having a lake. Now, short term, we've got to think about tornadoes. You know, we've been lucky the last couple of years. We had one go north of 82 up through the Telephone area, and we had another one come down through the Leonard area last year. So we've been bracketed. We've been lucky, but that doesn't mean that's going to hold. So I hired an emergency manager, an emergency management coordinator. Jason has since left. He took a job up in Arkansas and moved his family. But we started the groundwork with the county office, and it's pretty detailed if you want to do it right. We realized very quickly that our current system, the wires were cracked somewhere, it could not broadcast, we couldn't control it, it's outdated, it's just not going to work. So we began looking at the cost of putting up towers and 400-watt speakers on each tower with a circuit board that would allow us through a cell phone to broadcast up to 8 different messages. And we're actually using a local resource. We have a local resident who moved here from California, don't hold that against him, but he's a engineer. He's a communications engineer, and heard that we were trying to do this, and he came forward and said, hey, look, I can help with this. So with his help and doing some research, we planned on putting in 6 of these towers, 3 here through town, and then eventually 3 on the north side of what will be Lake Ralph Hall. Because we will now take on an onus of responsibility for our visitors. When the lake opens and a family comes up from Dallas to spend the day on the lake, they don't have a marine radio on their pontoon boat. They probably won't have cell phone service in the middle of the lake. So we talked about outdated technology. FEMA is not issuing very many grants specifically for speaker systems. They want everybody to convert over to digital technology, which is the apps on your phone, like Code Red. The county has some Code Red people. You can sign up for that. 2 challenges with that. You have to have cell phone coverage. If you don't have cell phone coverage, you're not getting the Code Red alert. And when you set up your Code Red alert on your phone, it's for your local area, where your home is. You punch in your information, and you get alerts that affect that location. How many people coming away for the weekend are going to go into their Code Red app and update that for Ladonia? And even if they do, there's no cell phone signal here. I had Sprint, and now it's T-Mobile. I have 0 bars in town. I have to move around town and hold my phone and stand on one leg, and I can get 1 bar. So if I'm out on my pontoon boat or I'm out on my fishing boat, I'm probably not going to have signal. And Code Red, even if I have it, isn't going to send me an alert for the Ladonia area. So while FEMA says this is outdated technology, when we're looking at a true emergency here in Ladonia, we have to go back to the basics. We need to see that radar image of the storm coming this way, monitor it with the Office of Emergency Management, and then activate our own system to safeguard our residents. And in working with Mr. Rosa, we looked at the terrain, the topography of how sound will travel through trees and hills and valleys and all of that, and his estimation was 6 towers to effectively alert everybody, at least within the city limits. Give us a few minutes warning. The second piece requires even more footwork, and that is how many of our residents have an actively used or usable storm shelter on their property. Worst case scenario, tornado comes through Ladonia, causes a lot of damage. Everybody descends, law enforcement, firefighters, all of that. Everybody's been through emergency management training, has a process to go through and clear buildings to make sure there are no survivors or there are no remains, clear that, and then move to the next location. And so there's spray paint markings on the buildings. You've probably seen that stuff on TV when hurricanes come into town, all that. But there's no record for how many of our residents have a storm shelter on their property. So if the tree in your front yard falls on that storm shelter and covers it up, and you and your family are in it, and first responders have no idea that it's even there, we're going to clear what's left of the home, mark it as cleared, and then move on.
Right.
Providing we don't hear you yelling and beating on the door and all of that, right? But we need to know, as part of a comprehensive emergency management plan, not only how do we get these early warning systems in place and find the funding for that, and we've been working on that for a year, but then also take it to the next level and be able to clearly identify each of the addresses and whether or not they have a storm shelter on their property. And there are grants available for storm shelters. So it's much more comprehensive than just a single siren in town or by the school or whatever. If we're going to do it right, let's do it right.
Awesome.
Like I said earlier, law enforcement nowadays, modern law enforcement is so much more than just driving around on patrol and writing tickets, working a stop sign or speeders or whatever. It's much more comprehensive. The training is much more comprehensive. The expectation from our citizens is much higher. And even though we're an all-reserve, non-paid department, we are still held to the same standards as every other law enforcement officer. We have continuing education hours that we're mandated to do, and that's on top of volunteer hours, two completely separate things. Our volunteer hours do not go towards our license requirements for continuing education. So for instance, our third civilian is our evidence technician, and her and our investigators spent 8 months going through the evidence that was left in our evidence room for more than 20 years, some of it.
Wow.
And they cleared 140 different cases and wrote destruction orders after working with the district attorney's office and our justice of the peace. They went through and tracked all of that evidence. The cases were long disposed of. The evidence should have long been disposed of. There was nothing pending, nothing critical in there. But it took them 8 months to track down all of the cases and all of the parties involved, and then go in front of the judge, and he signed 140 destruction orders for us to empty stuff out of there. That evidence tech is a graduate of Sam Houston State University. She has her 4-year degree in criminal justice and a minor in forensics. And she chooses to volunteer here. She put herself, paid her own way over there, paid for the registration, took off of work, and she spent 40 hours at Frisco Police Department going through an advanced crime scene class. And now she brings that expertise, that knowledge, here to the Ladonia Police Department. So much more than just patrol and stop signs, and there's a lot to run in a police department.
I can see from our conversation that you've already done a lot of work, and you have a truly complete vision for moving forward for emergency management especially, and keeping our public safe. What would you say to somebody who thought that the $5,000 budget item for the police department was not necessary?
Well, your police department would cease to exist, because that's what pays for the record management system subscription. That's what pays for the Wi-Fi hotspot in the police car. That's what pays for the on-duty cell phone. That pays for the uniforms. If that money were to go away, then of course the police department would go away. I do remember that first year when I came in front of the council and I said, okay, I've spent very little money, but we need a police car. And somebody at the time made the joke that when I made the presentation that I could bring a police car, marked police car, fully equipped to the city for $2,600. They thought I was one of those late night salespeople, and for only $19.95 plus shipping and handling, you can get two, right? That $5,000, we were able to reach out. I was able to reach out to some resources, find a used police car, bring it in, get it fully outfitted. The individual that outfitted the car with all the equipment donated a ridiculous amount of his time to install it all, and we paid a measly $800, which wouldn't even have paid for the console or the cage that goes in the car. But that $5,000 allowed us to not only pay for those subscription things and put the officers in uniform, but that first year we were able to buy that used car and put it on the road and start being able to patrol and show some ownership. You know, the city of Ladonia was on there. Quite honestly, as the city is growing, if we had created that actual strategic plan, the first 3 years were pretty much on course. It would have been an all-volunteer department. But now we do have Dollar General coming. We have other developers coming. We have bed and breakfasts and RV parks, and those things are starting to pop up on the radar now. Quite honestly, it's time now to start looking at a couple of options. Some cities have a set of money set aside to pay an hourly wage for a part-time officer. 20 hours, 30 hours of paid time, right? So it would mean a budget adjustment and start using some money to pay an officer to be here 2 or 3 days a week. The city is in no, and we get this, city is in no financial position to pay for a full-time officer. They're just not. There's no money yet. But we could and probably should start looking at some part-time paid positions, start taking the next step towards bringing on an officer. Approached recently for an idea. I think it would be a good one. You know, our kids are probably, and I'm father of 4, our kids are our most valuable resource. And with the world that we live in and the risk to our kids, Uvalde comes to mind. We have a ISD that has taken safety and security to a very healthy level. We have a really good program already in place at our ISD. Our investigator went down, met with the principal, looked at some things, and they've already taken some checks, taken some steps to make sure they're in check with security guidelines. So I think they're on the right track. But having a police officer in town, checking on the kids at the school, I think is becoming a need. It's becoming a necessity. In some jurisdictions, and this was would have been part of our strategic plan, was to do a partnership with the ISD. We did this in Florida. The ISD would pay 49% of the officer's wages and benefits, and the city would pick up 51%. So just over half. So it's very clear who they work for. You don't want to do 50-50 because then it becomes a battle on who's the boss. 51-49%, that gives us an officer to patrol and take calls in the city. But then several times a day they can go into the school, they can walk around, they can be seen, they can drive out to our elementary school. So they would have a dual purpose. They would be here to answer calls in the city, to do enforcement on our streets, to respond to 911 calls, but then they'd also be available to the ISD and be a presence with our kids. So whether we go with some part-time hours or we go with a split position, I think our first full-time position for the Ladonia Police Department should be somebody that can also be at the schools. Our kids are our most vulnerable. They're our most valuable asset. I have a son and 3 daughters. They're all grown, and now I have 2 granddaughters, and I can think of nothing more precious. But they're also very, very vulnerable, and unfortunately they are the target of opportunity for some of these people with evil intent. So if we're going to continue on a strategic plan towards a full-time police department, it's time to start talking about, we need to start having somebody here on a more regular basis. And we're happy to do it. But I can't ask an officer to leave their full-time job and come out and volunteer and lose money out of their paycheck, which pays their mortgage and, puts food on their table, any more than we already are. You wouldn't give up more than a day or two of pay to do a volunteer thing once or twice a year. We can't ask these officers, as they're doing now, to come to some of the meetings and do the things they're doing. Depending on which one we're talking about, they're making up to $40 an hour at their paying job. And they give up a 10-hour shift, $400 to come and volunteer and put gas in the car out of their own pocket. So they're losing money at work and they're paying to drive the police car. And they've been willing to do that for the last 3 years. I think we're at the point now we need to start looking down the road. What's next? So paid positions, or at least partially paid positions, I think need to be on the radar. And that would also give us an opportunity to take on some of these other projects too. Work more, be able to be here more and work with emergency management and do more in the city.
Ironically, tonight they're doing a budgeting workshop.
They are.
Have you given them any kind of proposal?
No, I have not been approached at all. Some of the dialogue up to this point has been, and you touched on a little while ago, why do we need a police department? I'm not going to bash the sheriff's office in any way, shape, or form. They have an incredibly hard job. They have a sergeant and 2 deputies for over 900 square miles. So you might have a deputy in Whitewright dealing with a call and a deputy and the sergeant up in telephone when a call comes out in Ladonia. Right?
It's a long ways off.
That's a long ways off. And so for them to have a 45-minute, an hour plus response, or maybe they're not able to make it for hours because they're on a fatal car accident or whatever they're dealing with. They have a lot on their plate and very limited resources. Why do you need a police department? Our volunteer hours may not seem like much right now, but it's more than you had before. The traffic enforcement in particular, we can show data. I think in the last year, the sheriff's office has written 3 traffic citations within the city limits of Ladonia in the last year. We wrote more than that just on the 4th of July. So I think we had 6 traffic stops. We wrote 4 tickets and 2 warnings. And again, I'm not bashing the sheriff's office. They have an entire county to cover. Ladonia can't be their only place that they hang out. But having this local law enforcement, this is our city. We want to have ownership in this city. We care about what happens in the city. So why do you need a police department? Well, I know that the developers and the builders that come in, one of the first questions that they ask the city secretary and they ask the mayor in the past was, do you have local law enforcement? They want to invest in a place that's going to be safe. We want to get involved with the kids at the school. We want to get involved with the community and do more events. We want to be their voice with TxDOT, with road construction issues, and deal with these abatement, the homes that are abandoned, and we need to go through the abatement process. There's a law enforcement involvement in that. There's a process. If we're here full-time, we can do that full-time for the city of Ladonia. We don't have to worry about an entire county. So, unfortunately, no, I've not been asked to weigh in. There's been no discussion yet about needs of the department going forward. I was kind of hoping for that. I would have shared some of the same things that I've shared with you. Partial paid position, some hours set aside to start paying people to be here, so they would be more willing to leave their paid position, take some vacation time, whatever, and come out and work. Or we could hire somebody part-time to do all of those hours. There's a lot of ways we could address that. Or a blended position with the ISD. But that's going to mean a significant financial investment that my understanding of the budget right now we just don't have. But with the cost of gas up, it's getting harder and harder for me to ask these officers, in one particular case, to drive 75 miles one way, come out here, pay for all of that, and then pay for gas in the city vehicle, and then pay for the gas to drive all the way back home. We're 3 years in. I think it's time the city starts paying for the gas in the city vehicles. I don't think that's too much to ask. But these are conversations that I can have with the council if I'm asked.
All right. Well, I think we've covered everything pretty well. I thank you so much for coming and sharing your story. And I hope that our citizens will listen and get something good out of that. And hopefully we can do this again sometime.
Well, I appreciate having me on, and just leave you with the reminder to everybody out there that we have a great agency. We've put together some real rock star people to serve this community, and they have a servant's heart. They are not getting anything out of this. There's no kickbacks. There's no games being played. The team that we've brought together really do want Ladonia to be the safest. We've picked up this motto, by the way, our strategic plan. We want to be the safest lakeside city in the state of Texas. That's our vision. When the lake opens up, we want to be known as the safest lakeside city in Texas. And we need the community to partner with us. We need them to help us address the issues in the community and support the men and women that are coming out and volunteering to make the city a better place to live.
Thank you so much for your time today, Chief, and I hope to see you again soon.
Great. Thank you, sir.